start the recording. Oh, you did that. Awesome, awesome. We're getting this down, Angela. We're getting this down. So good morning, everybody. Oh, hi, Stephanie. Good to see. I never saw you in person. That's fabulous. My name is Joanne Butcher, Filmmaker Success, and I don't spend too much time doing introductions because we introduced our guests in our postings and everything. But I have two guests today, which I've never done before. So this is going to be a bit like winging it. But we have here, actually, you know what, Maria? I don't know how you actually pronounce your last name.
Judice, so it's a Frenchie.
Judice.
Yeah.
Very nice. Or as my friend goes.
Right. There needs to be something very quaint about it. I don't know why the French are very quaint.
Ooh la la, ooh la la. So Maria is an impact producer, and in a little bit, Tamara Perkins is going to join us. And so what I always like to do, the reason I call this The Filmmaker's Life is because I think that it's so fascinating that I love the term filmmaker because it embraces so much. And, you know, there are so many careers in the field. People sort of think, oh, director. No, it's like there are so many careers in the field. And I just wanted to explore different careers that people might have. So Maria is an impact producer, and I would like if you could just tell us a little bit about what that means.
Let's see. So I am an impact producer that's probably been doing this, I would say probably going on 5 years, kind of like intentionally and professionally. And when I first started, it meant something that I made up so that I could do what I wanted to do. And so a few people in the industry were using it on like a very low level. So it was kind of like, you know, social justice filmmaking. It was filmmaking with a cause. It was all these different terms. And really the idea was that I had worked in the industry as a producer in a myriad of different fashions. And I got sick of everything. I just got sick of corporate filmmaking. I got sick of lack of filmmakers who were highly talented getting living wage jobs, right? Even if they directed a feature film that ended up in theatrical or in online or Netflix or one of the streaming services, they were still doing full-time jobs. And especially documentarians like make decent money compared to pretty much think about the whole gambit of narrative filmmaking, right? It's really documentarians really make decent money on average, right? When I say on average, it's probably something like 40 to 50,000 a year is kind of around what a documentarian makes. But still, they still had full-time jobs because this is called America, and there's no way most places you can survive on 40, 50. So most of my friends were teachers or some other kind of thing to supplement that income. Wow. And so I kind of always had this kind of spin to everything I did as a filmmaker. Just coming out of grad school, I had always kind of like focused what I did on having a living wage, right? Like I kind of said to myself, there's no way you can be an artist or a filmmaker unless you're making money. So I kind of was always doing this stuff for myself, and I had learned to sell my film, which was a short very early on. It was on cable. I had really, you know, in year 4 post-grad school during a recession, made all my money back on my film. So I had tools, but I didn't have language. And then I just became really sick and upset and gross with the industry. And the industry didn't just become about financial stuff for me. It also came around issues of gender, issues of race, issues of language, issues of ownership over story. And all these things then became about how do we impact? How do we change the industry? Or how do we just throw up something that is alternative to the industry? And so there were lots of movies out there that just weren't getting people to produce them. There were lots of movies out there that were sitting on the shelves and finally got their rights back. And so I kind of like jumped in to say like, all right, here's this group of people that I see. We're going to call it something like impact producing, and I'm going to ride that until it becomes popular. And now it has become really popular in the last year or so. And even when I met Tamara, who has now joined us. Hi, Tamara.
Where are you? Say something so I can see you.
Good morning. Hi.
Long time no see.
Sorry, this is the parents' life, right? I just
no worries. No worries at all.
So happy to be here.
Maria has taken us off. What I started with was asking Maria, what is an impact producer? And she was just getting to the point where she was just getting to the punchline.
Yes, sorry. It's a roundabout way to say it.
No.
And I'm rounding about saying it to say that we're kind of like on the beginning cusp of what impact producing is and what it possibly can be. And even when I met Tamara and we talked about her film, we didn't really use the words impact producing in the beginning. Like this was probably 3.5 years ago, even though I was connected to the film for the past 10 years. She just called me and she was like, I think you might be able to help me. And I've been watching and listening to things that you do. Can you help me? And so yes, I can help you. Is it impact producing or is it us putting together?
Can you help me is the best networking question of all time. Can you help me?
And I think we were both aligned in terms of what we saw filmmaking was, what we particularly saw her film was, what the work was within criminal justice about her film. So that's how it is. And now impacting producing has become really this idea of, giving, really alternative, autonomous pathways for films that don't fit in, the documentarian mold, that don't fit in the narrative mold, and have a certain sense of economics, participatory cinema, have a sense of understanding of social, political issues, have an understanding of what our position is as a documentarian or in filmmaking in these issues, and they're asking hard questions. So you'll see places like Firelight Media, you'll see the Southern Doc Center. These are some of my favorite places that I would check out around impact producing. And they're really trying to, what I say we always should be doing, which is pushing the boundaries of filmmaking, right? And that is from the beginning of your concept to whatever the end is. I don't necessarily think films have an end. I think they have multiple lives. They're like zombies or vampires, something that lives forever, some immortal creature. And that's really what we've done with Tamara's film too, is to understand the multiple lives of life after life.
I wanted to bring Tamara in, but you just said something that really surprised me. You said films that don't fit the documentary something. Could you just say what you mean by that? Because I would have thought Life After Life was a straight ahead documentary.
We would have thought that too, right, Tamara? So I think from a standpoint of an artist and a creative, I just want to say this in a place of not being too Pollyanna. Your story should live because you have given it life. And no one else should be able to tell you that your story cannot live. But since we have these gatekeepers, they constantly tell people that their stories have no place to live. And so the films either don't get done, or they end up shelved, or they don't get into distribution. And so Tamara, when she called me, she had finished her film, but she had had a hard time. Tamara is also a very talented producer, grant writer, and probably impact producer, if she wanted to call herself that,
That's right.
But she had a hard time getting people to jump on board during production. You know, when she had long, you know, trailers to show people, she had a problem getting people to jump on as the film was finished. And the craziest thing, we had a hard time just getting people to accept it into film festivals. And there's a myriad of reasons because of that. You know, I think a large issue at the time was that people had not really understood the restorative justice movement. They did not understand why we wanted to give such autonomy to formerly incarcerated people, put them on the screen, and let's sit back and not just empathize. I always have a hard time with that word, but let's literally walk through their shoes, hear their voices, and not allow the documentarian Tamara to editorialize their experience. And then let's bring them back to also be on stage with us, right? Like that was a hard concept. And so her film really got locked out of so many key places that it really should have been in. It's a beautifully made film. It looks fucking great. It fits all the documentary, Sundancey, Tribeca. It fits all those check boxes, but people still had a hard time with it. And so then we had to do a lot of work of creating grammar for people, creating an educational piece so people understood how to, we just did more education to get them on board, but then also we went around them and did our own shit. Like we connected those groups that knew what restorative justice was.
Before we get there, and this is all just amazing, but by way of introducing Tamara, I would like to talk a little bit about my experience with the film. So, and would one of you put a link to the film in the chat so that people can go and see it? So for me, and I've been talking about this a lot, I think, really, since, you know, we've been having the Black Lives Matter conversation. But for me, the most important causes in my life are ending racism and criminal justice reform. So one day, a friend of mine said, in passing, a group of us were at breakfast or something. He said, "Oh yeah, well, there's a premiere of a film I shot, you know, coming tomorrow." I'm like, "I want to go. What is it?" So I didn't know what the film was. So I walked in. I walked into the University of California Bolt Hall Law School, and we sat down at where the students sit in this big auditorium. And there was an 8.5 by 11 sheet on my desk, you know, same as everybody else had. And on one side, I think it said something about the movie Life After Life. And on the other side, it had some information about criminal justice reform. And that was really the first time I knew anything about the film, right? So the place was packed, you know. I was late. I was in something like the front row because nobody ever wants to sit in the front row, but I always do. And we watched this very powerful film about 3 men who were getting out of prison after serving life. They were getting out on parole, and then what it was like to try to live on the outside. And then afterwards, there was a panel, and Tamara was on the panel, and 2, I think, executive directors of criminal justice reform organizations, and 2 of the men who were featured in the documentary. So we had already seen their story, you know, and then this conversation happened. It has to be oh my God, I want to cry. One of the best film experiences I've ever had in my life. And it wasn't just because of the film, it was because of the conversation afterwards, and then the ripples and the waves as the conversation grew and grew. And I realized that I was surrounded by hundreds of people whose entire life was devoted to criminal justice reform. And the conversation that happened, people standing up and saying, "I served 30 years in prison," was extraordinary. So I just wanted everybody to know that, because this is why I love this film so much. Tamara, over to you. Tell us a little bit about you and your film. How the hell did you end up in prison for 10 years making this movie?
So first of all, you had to make me cry. That was
Yes, I love it.
a special experience. And I think I had told Berkeley, like, we were working with the Law Center and journals, a few different groups within the Restorative Justice Center at Berkeley, and I said, we need a bigger room. And I don't think they just didn't believe me.
Mm.
And because that was the premiere, basically, because we had been looking for, spaces and, going through this process with Maria. And, of course, we've earned our medal and like we are, accepted in all those spaces. But, it's a process when you don't already have all those relationships. But that screening, it was the first time I had seen a lot of people who were in my yoga class at San Quentin, like that were now home in the community. It was like a reunion, because I had been teaching before. I was teaching yoga at San Quentin, and it was kind of came out of this nonprofit I had started called Naroga, teaching yoga and mindfulness in schools and juvenile halls, and like ended up, coming into the prison and meeting them. And they asked me to tell their stories. So that's how this all happened. A year after I had been teaching yoga weekly at San Quentin, they found out I was also a filmmaker and asked me to tell their story. So that's how it all started. But to flash forward to that moment when so many people who had like put their faith in me were coming back together, because that is for me. And I think maybe Maria touched on this, like I am not about the witness based documentary. I do participatory filmmaking and document nothing, this is the space at which I come to it. And so this was the community that had helped create this film. And to see at that point, Noel and Harrison, who are in the film, there with me. Chris was not home yet, but he came home. He's home now, if you've seen the film. But to have this space and have so many folks together lining the aisles, them with their children, with their grandchildren. So it was people who've been working in the movement, but it was also justice impacted family members. And so I'm a justice impacted family member and a crime survivor. So that's another reason why I came to this film. So there's that like proximity piece and that's part of why and how I tell stories, is that I'm exploring issues that affect me directly in partnership with the folks that are in my film. That's the same with Clarissa's Battle. This incredibly powerful social warrior who's fighting for childcare for all of us, for all families, looking at it as a human right. And it's the same with my other new film, Rebound, with the women, looking at justice-involved women in higher education who are taking the reins on changing criminal justice reform conversation to include women. So that was a really powerful moment that you came to the film. And I actually can't imagine a better way to be introduced to it. So thank you.
I have a particular thing with films that I like to not know anything, but that was kind of extreme. It was like, as I said, my friend Jesse had shot it, and I was like, okay, you're my friend, I'm going.
Right.
I don't need much of an excuse.
Yeah, and it was sort of a family. You mentioned Jesse, so Jesse and Maria, they had known each other even before we had started working together. So, I mean, I've known Maria for 16 years or something like that, and we met, like something like 14, 15 years ago, and so she's known about it and part of it for a long time. And I wanted to say, as far as just building the foundation for impact producing, which I think also supports both getting our films funded and getting them out into audiences, building different streams of revenue, like that. I like to bring some of the veneer off of that, because a lot of it is just building these partnerships, right? Like getting people who are like-minded. So I put in the chat Keith Watley, executive director of Uncommon Law. So he was one of the people that was on the panel. And so his organization really does a lot of support around men and women serving life sentences and coming home, supporting families. It's a really incredible organization, and they've been a partner, right? Anti-Recidivism Coalition, which is another group that is really focused on both supporting formerly incarcerated men and women in taking leadership roles, but also just, making sure that people don't go back, but also getting involved in those paths to prison to support people. So it's like on both ends, right? So the kind of partnerships that we built over the 10 years making the film, you know, I don't think you need 10 years to build those partnerships, but you know, it was our first time. So yeah, I just want to say that those are like natural relationships that I think make sense. So the more you can begin to build those. Yeah, go ahead.
Before we go on, could you just give us sort of the log line of the film? I just want to bring everybody up to speed on what is this film that we're talking about.
Right. So, you know, it's basically after decades behind bars, three men set out to prove success can lie on the other side of tragedy. That's our little log line. It was, you know, three men incarcerated as teenagers, you know, spending 10, 20, and 30 years in prison. You know, what happens when you actually look at those unaddressed childhood traumas, you know, the impact of absence on families, you know, that precarious journey home post-incarceration. And as Maria alluded to, one of the reasons it was a little more challenging for us is that I purposefully, you know, I was teaching yoga with men who were serving a life sentence. So if you're serving a life sentence, it's obviously not always the case because there are a lot of people in for 3 strikes laws, which are ridiculous. But, you know, it often means that it's murder or kidnap, robbery, you know, something, attempted murder, something in that realm, right? So it's violent crime. Mm-hmm. And there was for a long time in this conversation, there was a real harmful separation between violent versus nonviolent crime, right? And I was not willing, you know, to step away from that and say, oh, we're only gonna, you know, have people in the film who are have a nonviolent crime. And in fact, I went the other way. Right. So everyone in our film has a quote unquote violent crime. Right. But I think that is, if that's all you see, you're completely missing the point. Right. And now, of course, it's a different time now. We understand the violence that is put on on Black boys, especially, but people of color, Black women. It's something that is pervasive in our communities. Right. So, and we're starting to have these conversations. But when we started this, I mean, the film started in 2007. We were still, our prisons were still under receivership for human rights violations when I was going into the prison. And, you know, it was just, nobody was talking about this at all. And so I think that's the other thing that Maria is alluding to, is that there are many of us here that are telling stories that have not been told, or have not been told from our perspective, right? Maybe they've been told by someone else who's coming in and has a story they want to tell, right? But when you really come in and you say, I want to know, or like, I have this lived experience, and, you know, so I want to create a space for you to tell, you know, your story, or for us to all go on a journey together. That is something that we think is really special. And, you know, the film has continued to have a life because of that. So I'm just gonna Maria, you.
And yeah, I just want to drop in real quick around log lines. So this is kind of what I was talking about around documentaries that don't really fit the mold. Part of like what we learned is that there's not one log line for this film.
Absolutely not.
And what this film really became, I think our biggest log line is, and it's not really a log line, but it's how we speak about the film. It's a film around families, justice impacted families, but families and communities. So instead of us just saying like, oh, all the formerly incarcerated people, here's a film for you to see, we were saying, no, this is a film on healing. It's a film on families, and it's a film on communities. And so that log line for us kept changing depending on who we were talking to, when we were talking to the ACLU, the log line changed, you know, and you have to be able to do that. I think Hollywood And the way the documentary world works is that it sticks you into this one log line, into this one story, and it only allows one perspective to be seen of your film. When, you know, whatever 93 minutes your film is, you left a lot of stuff out, and you need to figure out how to bring that stuff back in different types of ways. And you need people to see different parts of your film. So sometimes we have even played the film just like 20 minutes of the film. And that's because we need to be flexible, not just in this market, but in the way we tell stories, in the way we engage with others, in the way that we give life. So, I mean, that would be my encouragement for everybody, is to really, you know, play around with your film and see it from all sides, like a prism. You know, don't see this one very shallow narrative that Hollywood wants us to do, or that the industry wants us to do, because it's really not effective. It's not even effective for the audience member to only get one view of your story, right? You want them to be completely washed over and a little kind of active in engaging with your film, and to go off and do their own research. And one last point that I just want to make is that for Tamara and myself, I feel like we had a massive transformation personally with this film. And I am also from a justice impacted family, and what I knew beforehand working on this film versus what I know now working on this film, when it comes to understanding mass incarceration, when it comes to understanding reentry, you know, folks back into the community, is like tenfold, right? Like it really just became this thing beyond the film, which we talk about. It's not just a film. We're doing something else. The film is the tool to do the other work that we really needed to be doing.
That's right. So I knew this was going to be interesting, because I have both of you. We could talk for hours, either one of you. I have both of you. So I want to just stop for a minute.
Okay.
We're about halfway through with our time, and I like to be very precise about the time. This hour goes like that. And I like to say 10 minutes at the end for questions. And I also am very aware that filmmakers tend to talk about the current film that they're working on. And what I want to know is some other things. So I just want to take a few minutes to go back a little bit.
Okay.
Tamara, how did you become a filmmaker? And then I'm going to ask Maria the same question. Where were you? Were you on the playground? Were you in college? Where were you when you thought, I think I'm going to make films?
Okay, so I actually am, I think of myself more as a storyteller, and I have a memory of being in something like maybe second grade and possibly first grade, and getting two things. One, I had a teacher who gave me a platform to tell my stories. So I would write these short stories, and to have a teacher say, okay, you can read your stories. Here, come Tamara, read your stories. So that's one. And then the more practical thing is that I met this filmmaker, this Taiwanese filmmaker, Chi-Sheng Chow, is just a lovely person. And we actually connected at a cafe down the street in, I think it was like 2003 or 4. And I was learning Mandarin and he was learning French. I have a degree in French. He knows Mandarin. So we were talking about that. And he decided, like, I want you to produce my film. So he just was like, you're going to be an amazing producer. And my background was in tech and gaming, and I was a worldwide marketing manager. That was like the world that I was in. But I was still a writer and storyteller. I've always been doing that, but it never had been something that was, I've been working since I started college at 16, was working full time. Like my whole life has been about working. I never had like space to like really explore creativity in that way. And so when I was given this platform, it was incredible. It was incredible. That's how I met Jesse. It's how I met Maria. It's how I met so many people in this world and built a community and started making. So I started in fiction films.
I love that. Building a community. Yes.
Yes. And so it was all about that. And then I've always been an activist. I had already started Naroga, and I mean, that was already always a big part of my life. So it just became really clear to me that while I love making fiction films, and I actually just wrote a sci-fi feature, I'm planning to, do more in fiction, but I really wanted like media activism is what is the word that I've used for what I do.
Yes, yes.
And I just, it really came down to me saying yes to this new opportunity. So a new way of being.
Fabulous. Maria, what about you? What on earth made you think I'm going to be a filmmaker?
My story isn't much different than Tamara's. My parents were kind of artists, but, kind of had their own issues in life, so never realized artists. And I caught some of that. They're much better artists than I will ever be, or am yet. But so I was writing at a very early age, half encouraged, half not encouraged to continue writing. I was in the hip hop world in the 90s, taking photographs in the best era of hip hop ever. You can fight me on it. And writing for magazines and stuff, and working a full-time job at Wells Fargo as a data analyst. And my boss had come up to me one day and she was just like, you need to make a decision. Because my late nights, big bags, I'm in these streets and trying to do a job. And she gave me like an ultimatum. She's like, if you want to stay here, let's figure out your path and promote you. Because I wasn't doing a bad job. I was just, burning candles at both ends. Or you should go jump on a dream. And so I took I think she gave me 2 weeks to kind of decide. In that 2 weeks, I bought a ticket and applied to grad school, and I applied to film school. I ended up getting into Cal Arts, which was the best decision and the worst decision because I was a kid that had no art background, jumping into a fully fledged private art school. But I would say my more, kind of ethereal answer to that is that every day I am becoming a filmmaker. And I think there's these cycles that keep happening. And I feel like there's a cycle happening right now where I'm realizing who I am as a filmmaker, or I'm realizing what kind of filmmaker I want to be, right? The industry keeps shifting, it keeps changing, it keeps lying to us, it keeps trying to do things that it's not doing. And so our pathway and who we are as filmmakers change. I came from a very rigid, filmmaking background. Everything I do is very much based on Hollywood. And so right now I'm trying to unlearn that to try and create these whole other pathways to figure out how to give a film like Tamara's and all the films I have on Indigo Impact their own life, because there's so many people telling us not to, and we can't use the same tools to give it life. We kind of have to figure out our own thing. So I feel like I'm being reincarnated every couple of years as a filmmaker, and in a different filmmaker. I would say the filmmaker I was, when I graduated from grad school in 2007 is definitely not the same filmmaker I am now.
Great. And then the other part, and Maria, you already had touched on this earlier, the other part that I'm always very interested in is building a career, what that looks like. And a lot of the people who are on this call are filmmakers who really want to see them, eventually be full-time or make that work. And Tamara, at the point where I met you, I remember saying, I think you're ready to make this full-time. We had that conversation.
Right. That's right.
You remember that?
Yeah. I was thinking about that the other day, and it and that we even came up with a number, and then it just happened within a week. Yeah. You never know what intention is going to bring.
Yeah.
Exactly. And coming up with a number is a very important piece. I do that all the time with filmmakers, all the time. Just what are your numbers? What do you need to earn a month? How are you going to replace that income, and how are we going to do it, and just thinking that way instead of thinking about something else, which is usually to do with the craft, but to do with oh, that's right, Maria brought up the number of $40,000-$50,000, being able to make $40,000-$50,000 a year, which probably isn't enough to live on, but then but still it's a way to start thinking about, how do I bring in that kind of money? How do I bring in $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a month? What can I do to do that? So I'd love to hear you both talk about, and I love that word cycles, Maria, the cycles to get to a point where you can say, I'm doing this full time. And I have a really very well-known producer friend who, when I asked him to be on this, he said, "Oh, I don't know if I could claim full-time." I don't know, maybe he has some real estate or something. I don't know what he does. But anyway, to me, you know, if a filmmaker is a full-time filmmaker and they work at Starbucks, they're a full-time filmmaker.
Right. Totally.
I do just want to make one like talking about cycles. Like I have a 5-year-old, and that was a big shift, you know, in how I in what I see in films and what I see in my stories, and how I approach the craft and how I approach the business of the craft. Like there's a lot that I think, and of course, as a parent of a young child, I'm thinking about this all the time, and I don't see it as much in spaces where we're talking about the artist and the artist's life. And so I think that's really important, because many of us are artists and we want families too. And the reason I had that job was because I wanted healthcare so I could have a baby. That's it. That's 100% the only reason that I had that job. And I mean, at that point in my life, you know, there've been different points. So yeah, I think that it's really important to think about that. And also, when we were talking about our films having different lives, those different cycles, those different lives, that's actually very supportive of your income streams, right? You know, you're building relationships with the academic world, so that they want to, you know, include your film in their libraries. They want to bring you in and have you do a master class. You know, they want to keep that conversation going. And that's a many year cycle, and potentially one that, like, now it's coming up again. And now the film is like finding a home internationally, right? You know, there's all these different ways in which, you know, having a really broad and some openness about how your film approaches its life and its many life cycles that will support you.
So I love that you talk about multiple income streams. Years ago, somebody called me the queen of multiple income streams.
Hey.
Wait, you're Caribbean. Caribbeans always.
My job.
Right.
What are the multiple income streams? And this is an interesting thing. I'm just loving this conversation, but I meet so many filmmakers who have shame about the fact that they have multiple income streams.
Right. Totally.
Isn't that true? I don't know why.
No, I fought this for a bit, you know, because my father's a fine artist. I threw his link in there, and now he's a fine artist. The man is brilliant, you know, and I grew up with this man who could turn a canvas into anything. He can build a guitar and, you know, inlay it with anything. You see, this is one of his pieces from like 25, 30 years ago behind me. Yes. He can work with wood, clay, whatever. So he is like an artist. So growing up with that was very intimidating. He's also a musician and writer. I mean, it's just like, what? Whoa. How can I, you know, so it was a big deal for me, one, when he saw me as an artist, but two, he is actually the one who encouraged me. I got my MFA so that I can teach, because he found like there is something really lovely, and not everybody can teach, not everybody wants to teach, but he basically was an art teacher, and so he was finished at 2, and he always considered himself an artist completely, and he had created a life where he could make art on his terms. And I know that there are some that actually want to go even further and like just only create art on your terms, and it's great when that works out. But there are other ways in which you can create some stability and again, this is if you want that, right? To be health insurance. And health insurance. Oh my God, can our country get on board with that?
You know, I always say, well, this is my new reincarnation of being a filmmaker. And I'm saying this right now as I'm making a film. I'm in my editing phase of making my first feature. And I did that say that again, it's called Elephant. And I did that over the course of a year. I did that with maybe 3 to 4 people that showed up, you know, a couple times a week to shoot this. And we did it for very little money. So I'm going to say this statement because this is who I am at this point, which is I think we really need to divorce ourselves from our capitalism so we understand really where we're at. And that does not mean that you don't get paid what you're worth, but it means that you release the facade of what it should look like because capitalism is telling you this is what it looks like. And I think sometimes we get into these delusional states. And I'll tell you again and again and again, all the people that I have ever worked with have full-time other jobs. They are not making 100% of their monies off of filmmaking. And it's also because of their idea of what the industry is going to bring. It didn't bring that for them. So they signed all this stuff. They went through all these pathways. And by the time they come out of it, they still have their full-time job because they need to take care of their family. And so in the beginning, when you ask, how do you make a career on filmmaking, you really have to look around you and look at the resources that you currently have and use those resources to make a film. It's not about the equipment. It's not about the fancy producers. It's not about the fancy institutions that are going to co-produce your stuff. It's about what you have at that moment so that you get started on your pathway. And if we remove ourselves from capitalism, then we don't think we need all this stuff. We literally say we have everything we need. And we look at it through that lens to say every single step of the way, is this the step I should be taking? Or should I be taking this other pathway? Is this going to be throwing rocks in my path? Or is this going to bring this film to the community? I mean, like the hugest thing is there's so many great films out there that are shelved, that don't get to reach the audience they were supposed to, especially with documentaries. Like how many times have I seen a documentary and no one that is in that film or the subject of that film or should be watching the film has access to that film? And that's a problem.
That's right. That's absolutely right. So what are the ways that both of you put together your either, you know, multiple income streams or your Caribbean business model? How do you do it? How do you do it?
Well, so some practical things. I talked earlier about partnerships, right? So I just, you know, I don't want to do commercials. I probably should. It's never been something that I felt drawn to. It doesn't mean I'll never do it, but I was not ready to do that for a long time. So I decided if I'm going to do anything that's outside of my film or films and my own personal projects, I wanted to support organizations that I felt an affinity with, right? So that's been something that I've done over the years, is helping with those, media for advocacy agencies or organizations that I believed in, and a lot of those partnerships came naturally through, my film projects or, just my relationships in the world. So that's been a way that I could, both earn an income and support, groups that I, felt drawn to. And then on top of that, I didn't need the MFA to do the master classes. I've been doing those for a long time. Like we all have something to say, I talk about that all the time. Like I think Maria said that, like you have beautiful stories. And, when it comes from you, your own, whether it's just your imagination or your heart or whatever, like that they deserve to be told and you have something to say, right? Those of us who are creative. So there are spaces for you, for that to be monetized. Cause I think that's one thing I really believe, that there's these our skills should be monetized in a sense, like however that is, right? The capitalism thing is challenging because it's true. Like we get so caught up in that, but we have worth. So it's more about worth than it is about the money, right? Like really putting, being intentional about the fact that our stories matter. Our stories do, support opening hearts and eyes and minds. And, that's what I'll say about that.
Right. And what about you, Maria? How do you do it? How do you juggle those balls?
So I'm gonna step back to say, in the beginning, I did everything.
So, right. Yeah.
So when I first came out of grad school, I worked as assistant producer, which is literally somebody's secretary and dog walker. And then I, produced a bunch of my French films, and then I also worked as a waitress in a coffee shop, person, whatever. I had a grad degree at this time, right? And I had a very successful short film, and nobody was coming to check on me. So this was my life. And then as I got kind of mid-career, came out with a couple shorts, I went to a full-time job, just like Tamara, worked for MTV for something like 8 years, sucked hard, but I made good money. And I was able to make more films because I made that money. And then after I really got sick of that, I'm in this phase now where I started to build Indigo. So Indigo is kind of like my consulting arm where I really consult on films. And some films I really take on, like Tamara's, but most people come to me and we do a couple hours of consulting, which is literally around digital strategy, festival, whatever the hell festivals are going to be right now, but around festival strategy, really around trying to figure out whatever the voice and center of their film, and kind of like what you do, Joanne, which is just how are you fucking making money right now? Sorry, I don't know if we can cuss on this, but yeah, so many filmmakers haven't figured out that piece, and that's such an important piece. So I do that. And then I'm also development director at Code Tenderloin, which I bring the same lens of impact producing to Code Tenderloin. We just got 1.6 million from Jack Dorsey to basically affect the Tenderloin. And so those tools that I have, I think.
Congratulations.
Yeah, it's huge. Huge for us as a very small nonprofit, but also the tools that you have are not limited to just making filmmaking. And I think we have to give ourselves more value than we have. And so, I started at Code Tenderloin probably like 5 years ago, just volunteering to do whatever they needed. And then I kind of like did a lot of the media stuff and then started to do like fundraising things for them. And then we moved to like now where I just really work on development, how we create partnerships, how we build our audience, and what kind of monies we take, and really changing the game and the conversation around philanthropy, because it's really screwy. Philanthropy is screwy. And then I teach. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no. Go ahead. I've got to go back to that, but go ahead.
And then I teach a screenwriting class at which I'm on the board of a school in North Carolina called School of the Alternative, which really focuses on giving art school education at a very nominal price. They pay me very little, but they pay for my arts kind of sabbatical every year. Wow. So I get to go there for 2 weeks. I get a little bit of money. I'm in the mountains. I teach, and then I do my own art, and I do art workshops so that I can spend 2 weeks in my art space. So I think also we need to look at our growth and where we get our education and how we can get that without spending all of our fucking money on it, right? Like, you don't need to go to a Sundance masterclass to learn how to be a better writer, but you can find a writing space that can support that without you coming out of your pocket for it. And then like Tamara, I'm on panels, I do screenings, so people pay me. I do curation a lot. I did the Matachi Festival in Oakland for many years. It is literally like whatever your heart is okay with doing and that you can get money on, you should do that.
Mine is similar. I just wanted to say, like, I do all of those things as well, mostly from the writing side. And it's just, we're lucky that we get to work with such incredible artists. Like, you're John, you build a relationship, and then I do a lot of creative producing and writing and fundraising and things like that. So, which again, I think is all kind of comes back to this partnership and this relationship building.
Yep.
I want to open it to questions, but the reason I have to go back to Code Tenderloin, which you got to put that link in as well, because I don't know if you know this, Maria, because Maria and I don't know each other so long. But the reason I moved to San Francisco was as the director of development at the YMCA, I came here to raise $38 million.
Wow. Okay.
Which never happened.
Wow.
And so I left to go and do a development campaign at Youth Radio, but that's how I came here. And so my heart is in the Tenderloin, as I'm sort of getting ready to leave San Francisco. My heart is in the Tenderloin. So
I think all of our hearts are in the Tenderloin, and that's one thing that we're trying to really push through Code Tenderloin. Is like, everybody has to walk through there some point in their day or their week or their month, and all of our hearts are there, even if we're not watching every bit of it. And especially right now, it needs us, So, I mean, it's storytelling, Like, if I'm not showing you, it's all about storytelling. Tamara said this in the beginning, like, it's, yeah, filmmakers, but really we're just storytellers, and we can like just show up and help people really shape their stories in a way that other people listen. Like, communication is on two sides. You need a sender and a receiver. And if they're not receiving on one end, then you need someone there to help you help the other end receive.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So I'm getting used to this. So we get to the last 10 minutes. I open it up for questions. The conversation has been so good. Everybody's sort of like,
no, please ask us questions. No.
so if you can raise your hand physically or digitally,
Diane.
take the opportunity to ask a question.
Hi, my name's Diane McKenzie. I'm just going over both of what you've done, both of you have done in your lives, just even in the last 10 years was absolutely amazing. And, one of the questions I have for you, Tamara, is I find it so moving that like how it is, like how did you end up setting up a yoga, given your history, given how, you know, your experience when you were younger? Like, how did you end up starting to teach yoga in a prison and then evolving into all of this? I hope that's an okay question, but you know.
No, well, maybe Maria, somebody could drop in. I have a TED Talk that talks a little more about it because we won't have time, but I actually have talked about my first day walking into San Quentin many times, actually.
I did hear that TED Talk where you're talking about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, a big part of my healing process has been yoga and mindfulness work. And I think because I had been working in juvenile halls for a while, and of course, you know, I'm not going to go into it, but I had a very troubled youth, and you know there was a lot of trauma in my own and abuse in my childhood, and that thankfully has, you know, I feel like I'm in a you know, I've been able to transcend that and channel that in a way that I think tells helpful stories. But you know, I think that in so many ways life is a choice. Do we I don't know, do we move through the challenges? Do we walk through the fire? Or do we you know, do we retreat, right? And I think at some point I decided that my life was I wasn't going to be really fully in the journey of my life unless I walked through the fire. And I apologize. I don't know. I'm so tired right now because I'm a mostly full-time parent until this week for 4 months. So I'm more emotional talking about it. But yeah, I mean, I think that that's one thing. And I think that kind of comes back to everything that we're talking about, right? Is like, how do we just tap into who we are? And that's, you know, really authentically telling stories, making choices that are authentic and supportive of who we are. Because I think that's just as important as any money that we're getting. Like, are we building balance into our lives? Are we demanding that a bit? Because we're not, you know, that's not going to be given to us in a sense. So yeah, I think that was, I just made that choice that I was going to walk forward. And of course I was completely blown away. Like I really, I had been fooled, like most of us, by media, by what media sells us. And it also really grounded me in this idea that I am not going to feed that machine. I will be doing something different. And that's what we do. Maria laughing at me. Ha! Anyway, go ahead.
So, and the reason that I ask is I'm making a film right now. I'm a survivor. I'm making a film about women artists who have survived sexual or physical trauma. How it is that we work that through we work through that with our work, and then thereby empowering ourselves and our community. And while talking to other people about this, is I've been approached by someone who Mariette Fermot, who works with prisoners down in San Diego, because she said, Diane, these are stories that you really want to be telling. And so I'm trying to, like, you know, because I still feel like I'm telling the stories from the other end. and trying to figure out how to sort of move it so that it's a balanced story. I don't know if I'm articulating that well, but
we should talk offline. My new film Rebound is set in San Diego. We may not know many of the same people.
Right. So anyway, okay. So thank you so much. Thank you both. That was
great, Diane. That was great. Who else is going to take this last opportunity? Yes, Stephanie. Yay!
Hi, Stephanie. I was wondering, Tamara and you, Maria, if you have input as well. You mentioned you started out with making short docs and short films, and did this big feature work. What would you wish you knew, like coming from, making short docs to creating a feature? Because that's like where I am right now. And what do you wish you would have known?
Great question.
I can throw in here. I think people dismiss short work, and you need to use all of your short work to understand the pathway of making big work, meaning that you need to do everything you would do for a feature for a short. So meaning that if you make a short and you haven't found someone to distribute it, you need to go back to the short and find that. And I don't care if it's 5 years old or 3 years old. There are so many more places out there right now that are looking for short work. And especially in the international market, they still love shorts, but there's no difference here. And I think we have a misconception that there is a difference, that the short should almost be a throwaway. But really the short is the place to learn all the lessons with hopefully less risk and less resources put it to it. Does that make sense? So that means like everything for, does your short have a website and a link? Does your short have a place where you give donations to you or whatever cause you're working with? Does your short have a digital strategy attached to it where you're doing that same promotion on Twitter, Facebook, whatever freaking platform you want to do it on? And is your short also promoting you as a filmmaker, which me and Tamara have conversations about all the time? Like, it's not about the thing that you put out, it's about you. You are the biggest value. You are a wealth of creativity. So you should be using that short to put yourself on stages, to put yourself in conversations, to be putting yourself as a filmmaker for the next 3, 5, 10, 50 years where you're going to be a feature filmmaker.
And that was a fantastic answer. Oh my God. Does anybody else have a question? Oh, who is that? Who is that? Alex, was it? No? I thought I saw some kind of movement. Anybody have a question? What a beautiful, beautiful conversation. I think this is the first time on the call that I've cried. We had multiple cryings. I think that's like a major success, right, Anne? Major success. And I think you used the term justice impacted families. I'm a crime impacted person. There was no justice part of the experience, but the transcendence, the word you used at the end there, Tamara, that we are required to go through if we wish to actually be able to manifest our stories in the world, I think is a very special thing. So I just really appreciate both of you, your time today. I look forward to knowing you more. I look forward to learning more about all of your work. And I just want to close by saying, as I always say, for those of you who would be interested in speaking to me, please contact me. Here is my, oh, that's not my calendar, but I'll put my calendar in the chat before I close it. And please, take some time to talk to me about working basically on your careers. And before I let you go, I just can't thank you enough. This was really extraordinary. And thank you so much for your work. Oh, here's something I do want to say before you go.
Oh, go ahead.
This is for the two of you, because I haven't said this out loud, but I've actually been thinking about this for well over a year.
Okay.
So I work with filmmakers. Really, it's all about money, business, sales, distribution, marketing, business, all of that stuff. And I've had this idea in my mind that I would like to offer those services to a filmmaker who's making a film about criminal justice reform. And I don't know quite how to do it. I have a client, Slam Dance. I was thinking about maybe doing something in partnership with them, but I'd like to turn it into an opportunity to kind of, put out into the filmmaking world. I'm looking for these kind of films. I'm looking for these kind of filmmakers. I'd like to work with somebody to see a film like that get out. So this is the first time I'm saying that out loud. And I don't quite know what it's gonna look like, but maybe you guys can help me with that. And so I will, I'm just so grateful to have had you, and thank you so much. And it's 10 o'clock and I want to let you go, but what I do is I stay on with everybody for a few minutes and just chit chat. So.
All right. Thank you, everybody. It was great
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
See you on
you guys
Thursday.
so
I'll see you on Thursday. Joanne?
Yes. See you on